Alrighty, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to another SmudTalk. This is a unscheduled SmudTalk. We just like to pop these up on the weekends when we have, nothing better to do, but we have time to have something unique. And this is one of those cases where someone in chat wanted to sell or talk about one of their ideas to us, and we're going to ramble on with it. So I don't know how to refer to you specifically. I know your name on chat. I know your name in Discord. How do we talk to you, sir? How do we address you?
You can just call me my friends just call me a Crumb. So you can just call me Crumb.
Crumb it is. Okay. Hey, LiteratureDevil, how's it going?
I'm pretty good. Always high energy on July 4th.
That's true. That is true. The Americans are very energetic in general, but July 4th is a special day. So
it's really cool because the mere act of just celebrating this day will make all the SJWs and PCs and neckbeards cry. How dare you love America? and then I'll just gather all their tears and drink it because they sustain me.
So happy birthday, America. Congratulations on another year gone by. And bravo.
Yeah, July 4th is the day where July 4th is just the day where we just go like werewolf and we just go wild and fucking werewolf, man.
Okay.
That's the only way I can describe it.
Okay, well, in the background, if you guys don't know, I just did a Google image search of comic books, and there's all kinds of crazy images and this and that, Western, of course. But we're here to talk about Crumb's comic book that is up and coming, and all the details therein. LitDev knows just a little bit about the comic book industry and his involvement. And I know in general stories and comic books. I've bought them, I've read them, I've bought books on how to make them too, and I never got around to it, even though I was a kid and tried doing that, and that was fun. So we're going to talk about that. So introduce your concept for your comic book, and what do you want to do with it?
Okay, so the idea that I had for a comic book is called Bronx Boys, which is, I don't know if this is like ass backwards of me, but it's actually a sequel and spin-off to another comic that I want to write called Parasite Warchief. And Parasite Warchief, to give you guys some context, is basically my take on the evil Superman trope as seen in shows like Invincible and The Boys. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to try to like add my own sort of spin to it, sort of just add my own flair and identity to the I guess you could say the evil Superman's kind of like a trope nowadays, right?
I see. So you're talking about a satirical piece, or is it a serious piece like Invincible, or like what's the actual take you're going for?
I would say that Parasite Warchief is a very it's a character study between two characters, Daryl Todd and Carl McKenna. Daryl Todd being the Lex Luthor to Carl McKenna's Superman. And to give you the Cliff Notes version, because the stream is about the Bronx Boys, not Parasite Warchief.
Okay.
Carl was sent to Earth to basically conquer the planet, and he's given a 100-year time limit to basically accomplish this goal. And his species lives for millions of years, so basically 100 years is nothing to Carl. So initially, Carl's very conflicted about this notion because hey, he lives on planet Earth. He knows people. He is connected to humanity in some way. He doesn't want to destroy it. But over the course of the story, various tragedies and events happen where Carl's perspective on humanity shifts. Where Carl goes from being apprehensive about destroying humanity to basically being angry at the human race, to being cold and distant, to almost near the end of my vision for Parasite Warchief is near the end of the story, Carl almost respects humanity at the end. And it's humanity might be flawed, but humanity does have a right to exist. And this kind of plays into Bronx Boys, where near the halfway point of Parasite Warchief, Carl fulfills his dreams, and he, I wouldn't say dreams, more like his goal, basically conquering the human race, and basically installing himself as supreme leader of Earth. And what happens is, his reign is not very, it's it's fucking nightmarish. Where Carl basically assumes the reins as like this North Korean-esque dictator, and he essentially institutes like eugenics programs. He basically suppresses dissidents, just all the usual stuff that a dictator would do. And at the end of the story, Carl is deposed, and the Earth slowly begins to rebuild, which leads into Bronx Boys. And Bronx Boys is more like a sort of an eye on the ground sort of perspective of this world that I've created, where basically it's like what happens after the evil Superman is defeated. Like how does the world recover from something like that? Okay. Because in the story, Carl manages to essentially wipe out 40% of the human population through like his ruthless eugenics programs.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
yeah. So
I like the idea that you have a previous story that you were whatever playing with, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do what was all after this, which allows you to do a series of flashbacks or side plots or side stories with other characters to tell the story of how they got there.
Yeah.
So it's all post something else, which is great because it's like you had an original idea and you're like, oh yeah, I like this. And then you're like, wait, it can go better. I'm going to make a second story because now I have all the motivation and history for this next story that you've figured out, which is not too uncommon. Not too many people start that way. They like to start with their original idea and just run with it, but you actually figured stuff out before you went there. So that could be to your benefit, and it could allow for a lot of detail for characterization and flashback and relationships and that sort of thing on the state of the world, on how people are behaving and why. So that's, to me, is interesting, at least because I haven't seen that in a while. But if you can keep that in mind and have I don't know what's referred to as a Bible, where you have all the lore, all the information in your head that's just there for reference, and then you actually have your script for what you're doing, I think that would be pretty helpful for you. So, okay, great. What's the time frame for writing this story? Like, what is the I don't know if you've planned anything out, but what do you estimate would be, like, this is a year run? This is a single comic? Is it a 4-part miniseries? Like, what do you see the scope of this project to be?
Well, with Parasite Warchief, I wanted to be, I'd say at most I would want it to run for 2 years, because it's a very self-contained story where basically we go from the story basically has 3 acts. We have Teenage Days, Act 1, which basically follows Daryl and Carl as they basically socialize and basically go through their teenage years, and Carl basically learning about his superhero abilities and sort of his very disturbing ancestry. Then we have Act 2, the War Band, which basically gets into the formation of the War Band, which is basically Carl's evil version of the Justice League. We have Conquest, who's basically a stand-in for Wonder Woman. We have Blue Shift, who's a stand-in for the Flash. We have a Homeless King, who's a stand-in for Batman. Voyager, who's a stand-in for Martian Manhunter. And then we have Typhoon, who's a stand-in for Aquaman. And then we have Act 3, which is called Endgame. I know, very on the nose with Marvel and shit, but Endgame is basically sort of the conclusion of all these various arcs, of the conclusion of the War Band and the final battle between Daryl Todd and Carl McKenna, which, a spoiler, it both ends in their untimely deaths.
Okay, so that's Parasite Warchief. Do you actually want to start with Parasite Warchief, or do you want to start with Bronx Boys and then go backwards in time and tell another story in that 2-year span?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm thinking about maybe starting with Parasite Warchief because that just makes the most sense. You start with the beginning of a story and then you move on to the sequel and the spin-off.
I got you. Okay, so this is going to be a 2-year thing. So first year would be the first book, Parasite Warchief. Second year, Bronx Boys. Is this going to be like, how are you going to be, if you were to get proper artists and funding and when publishing, would this be once a month, once every 2 months? Like, what would be the release schedule that you wanted to follow for this production?
I would say I would have an issue like every single month. I would say.
Okay, Litdev. That was what I assumed. I just want to ask Litdev. Litdev, is that conceivable to do? Let's say with a certain Kickstarter, or like finding an artist, finding an inker, finding a colorist, that sort of thing. What would be practical for doing a 12-month run or 12-episode run for one comic book, and then another 12-episode run for the second?
Well, usually today, when you're doing like a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, people don't usually want month-to-month stuff. It's been tried before. Like you have like a comic book that's like 24 pages or something like that. Mm-hmm. People don't really enjoy that. Because usually it takes a while, even with 24 pages, if you're working on your own. Usually it takes a while to get it out there. And by the time they get that, it's okay, here's the first issue, and it's already over, and all that waiting gone in a few minutes. People like the Netflix method, essentially, with crowdfunding comic books, the graphic novel. They want a graphic novel. So I would suggest planning out one story. I mean, you don't have to do the 12-issue thing. That's you don't have to have 12 issues of stuff in one thing. Maybe 6 issues worth of stuff. Maybe usually around 60 to 80 pages is around the golden number. So about 60 pages is usually around how long comic books tend to be when in Indiegogo and everything. And then the artist, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff you have to consider before you even start, like budgeting. Seeing what kind of printer you go with, that's a big one, because usually they have different prices. They can differ outrageously in those things. And get an artist you trust, that's key. I've seen so many nightmare scenarios of other people who have paid artists and gotten artists on board, and the artists kind of disappear, or the artists give them back something that's terrible. They give you, or they might give you back a page every 6 months or something like that, and it's like, well, that's way too long. It's not fast enough. So you have to be able to control that, get on the back and everything. And what you don't want to do is get all that money and then pay them all up front for the art. I mean, you might have the money in your bank account, like, might as well pay them all and get it out of the way. That's not the best practice. It's the worst practice. That's the part where even honest artists will just disappear on you, because once they get paid, they've been paid, and they're looking for other ways to get paid. So they'll start taking on more commissions elsewhere, and you're stuck there saying, hey, where's my art that I paid you for? Sorry, man, I got commissions. I got to pay the bills. Because, from their point of view, they already got the money. They don't need to, I mean, doing work for you is not getting them any more money. And even honest artists will fall into that, where they've already been paid, just don't have to work for you anymore. Mm-hmm. And
so what you're saying is I got to dangle the carrot in front of them. Just got to dangle that sweet juicy carrot. Be like, hey, I'll give you this carrot, but you gotta draw me shit. Say,
commission them first, see how they do, see how you work together, see how they can envision your characters, and then even if you have the money, say, okay, here's the goal for this month. I'll pay you this much money. You do this much work this month, and then next month I'll give you some more work to do, and I'll pay you for that much.
Okay, that seems reasonable, but. The reason why I suggested the monthly release schedule is because I want to have a manga inspired twist with Parasite Warchief and Bronx Boys, where I wanted to have monthly issues that are basically around the same length as something like Attack on Titan or a Smud knows this, a Record of Ragnarok, where basically it's 40-something pages of just jam-packed with content for to satisfy a reader for a month before the next issue comes out.
That'd be good. Yeah, just 40 pages, 60 pages, not 24. Because the way the printers work is that the longer it is, the more copies you do, the cheaper it becomes, and then you have the pages and everything. Pages, they get more expensive. So, and if you start up again with a new book, you start over again with the price discounts.
Okay.
So you do 12 different books. It's going to be 12 times restarting. It's going to be way more expensive than putting them all jam packed in one graphic novel, and then printing that over and over again.
All right.
So okay. I would do like the graphic. I suggest graphic novel, especially if you're just an independent creator. The graphic novel, way more cost effective, and the backers love that way more than just smaller things.
Okay.
Smaller pages.
So 60 to 80 pages sounds like 3 to 4 comics in one, or at least typical 20, 25 page comic. So,
right.
And if you planned out the stories, is it possible that you could either make I don't know, was a quarterly release? Like it would take at least a page a day. Let's assume a page a day by the artist if they worked hard and did all the drawing and the inking. Unless you're hiring another artist for coloring, I don't know how that would work. But
yeah, I made that mistake. I hired one artist thinking that okay, it'd be awesome. Just pay one artist, he does the whole thing. It's not really not really. But like if you have a longer book, it's not really that practical. You need some guy to do the coloring. Because that alone takes a lot on its own,
right?
The coloring,
and
then the guy do the lettering.
I don't know if they use like a Wacom or they still use blue pencil for layouts, depending on the style. Eventually, it has to get scanned and digitized, and then the coloring would be either digital coloring, or before it gets scanned, it has to be with a light table and then inked and then colored, and then all the you don't have to literally draw the words. Like you don't have to go that far if you really wanted to, but there's all these techniques, and you have to figure out which one is going to match your style and your workflow, and how much you can do yourself.
Yeah, I'm planning on not having colored issues like off the bat. Like I'm planning on just having this be like a black and white series, similar to Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead, or like a majority of manga. So. No coloring. If Parasite Warchief and Bronx Boys proves to be successful, I will consider releasing colored versions of the story.
That's what Graham Nolan did when he released his. He decided to go with what was it? The Shanu, and that was all in black and white. And he said that because he wanted to do it in black and white first, just in case he didn't know how much success he would have. So he went with black and white first because when you had color, it's a significant cost difference. Basically, it adds on thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Adding on color.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who are artists, and always if you want a colored sketch or something, it's going to cost you a few extra dollars. So I am privy to that information there, so I'm very much in tune with how artists think and act when it comes to prices and stuff like that.
How about ideas before you even go to publishing? How about doing a webcomic series? How is that a option for either publicity, or is there a monetary thing you could do with webcomics? I'm not really familiar with how that operates if you want to start independent without anything. Would that be a better idea?
I mean, I'm not opposed to doing it in a webcomic format. The only issue would basically be how would I make the money off it?
Right.
I would assume maybe just a Patreon or something like that.
Okay, because the reason I brought that up is because some webcomics start off really small and they still are going strong. Like One Punch Man, he has his original One Punch Man sketches, which look pretty much like he's drawing on a napkin and just scribbling. And then he has...
Yeah,
Yeah, you're aware of that. Yeah. Okay, then he has the actual manga, which is professionally done. And then, of course, the anime.
Yes.
So he just got good by telling good stories, and everyone's like, hey, it's a cool webcomic, and has shitty art. But that's fine, because people liked it anyway. Yeah. So I don't know how that works, because that's a crazy story to learn about how you go from just making random sketches to creating anime and getting picked up by a publishing house. But there are other avenues in case you can't raise the funds, or your Kickstarter doesn't work out, or it depends on the rules of Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever crowdfunding platform you're on. That it's like a lump sum, all at the deadline, or is it an ongoing campaign? I think LitDevs is an ongoing campaign. So it depends on how you want to set that up. But the best thing you've got is you have motivation. It doesn't matter what you're starting at, how good your art is, who your artist is, so long as you got the motivation and you keep doing it every day for, I don't know, 4 hours, whatever your time frame is. This is all about dedication. So if you're serious about this, this is going to be your work. Okay, you're not going to make any money. you're gonna hope people like your ideas enough to give you money, and the way you do that is you get an artist. If
you're a writer,
if
you're a writer, you're not making any money.
For sure.
So
the way that I've seen, Kickstarters, for video games or comics, you have to have a product of some kind, not necessarily a comic book, but a series of pages, a series of posters. All kinds of cool things that go, oh, that looks great. That artwork alone looks good. And then you have to have a made-up trailer, a made-up action trailer that is, again, all comic book art, and put some music to it, put some voice acting to it, and just try to entice people. I know it sounds kind of weird outside of making a comic book these days, but if you have a cool trailer with a sexy voice or some sort of like crazy idea that, oh, that could be fun. That's all, one little hook is all it takes. And you got to
remember the Gotham High trailer? It's like the girl next door.
Oh God.
And then everyone was making fun about how she sounds like a sex line worker, but it actually does work.
It depends.
Gotham High was just Gotham High was just a mistake.
Yeah, it really depends on what kind of group of people you're trying to target. You could use sex, you could use violence, you could use really good line art. I don't know, whatever you feel is best. But you gotta give people something to, ooh, what's that, and get them intrigued. So that's a lot.
I mentioned Invincible earlier in this conversation, like, and the influence will carry over because like Parasite Warchief and Bronx Boys are not going to be like, child-friendly stories. Like they're going to be incredibly violent. Bronx Boys in particular deals with some very heavy-handed subjects, a lot of just basically seeing like the filthy underbelly of like of the Bronx, essentially, because that's where the story takes place, of the borough Bronx in New York. So it's just going to be a very seedy sort of like underbelly, essentially, where I'm going to be exploring like a lot of like what happens like behind like closed doors in like a major metropolis, especially after like especially after an apocalyptic event where like 40% of the human race basically gets like genocided in just a terrible tragedy.
Okay, so we have a 2-year time frame for you, so that's going to be whether you publish it in 60, 80 pages or more, for cost reasons, of course, and you still want to do a 12, like if you were releasing it in that style of 12 or once a month for 12 months. So you're looking at, let's do some math, at least 250 to 300 pages a year for 2 years. So
yeah, I'd say that's I'd say it's accurate.
Okay, so think in terms of how much a page costs. LitDev, what would be a typical page cost for everything involved?
Usually, if it's include coloring and everything, I would estimate around easily about $300 a page.
Okay, so without coloring, that'd be what, half or like
it would be maybe $250, maybe $200.
Okay, all right. So that's the budget we're looking at. So let me just pull up my calculator. So $200 a page.
That'd be a safe estimate, really safe estimate.
Right. Times 250, 300. You're looking at $50,000. 250 pages, $200. And that's paying the publisher, paying the artist, any other kinds of deals you got going. You have to pay for.
You also have to include the shipping, which is called the dream killer because of how expensive it can be.
The weight. Yeah, the weight is one of the problems with actual products. If it's more than 4 kilos, is it 5 or 6 kilos? That's when they start charging you with certain boxes and certain packages, depending on which shipping method you're using. So
yeah, this is definitely going to be like a time this is definitely like going to be both like a time sink and and just like like a money sink as well.
Yeah, you are going to be not making money, at least from this project, for 2 years. So that is the difficulty of writing comic books because of the physicality of publishing.
That's why it's suggested you do maybe 60 pages. That's why 60 pages is a sweet spot. It's long enough where people will be willing to wait for it, but not too long where you're going to spend all kinds of outrageous amount of money on it.
Right. So that's those are real numbers. It's not impossible, but we would have to help like advertise, collaborate with others to get the message out. So what would be a standard? I would say Indiegogo would be the way to go because you can keep the campaign running for longer.
Yeah, Indiegogo, one of the advantages is that they take the money from the backer up front, whereas Kickstarter, I believe, they kind of write you down, and then when it's time, they eventually take the money, which your boy Zach kind of had that problem when he did a Kickstarter in the past. It would be he would get a bunch of backers, but some of them, like their credit cards had gone bad, or they had overcharged at that point, so that their credit cards were full, and like he maybe got 80% of the backers that were supposed to have gotten. So you could have 1,000 backers, but maybe get $800 or 800 of them to get they charge their credit cards or whatever. Indiegogo just takes it up front. So that's good. That's better for the backer, I think. Better for you. Because the backer, it's already done. They want the thing. They paid for it. All they got to do is wait. You get everything up front, and then it goes to your project. Sounds pretty good to me. And also, Kickstarter is also way more political than Indiegogo. Indiegogo doesn't care. Indiegogo is like, okay, well, as long as you're making money, it's fine. Kickstarter will just they have political czars and stuff over there. So if you voted Trump, you can't do it over there.
Yeah, I'm fucked in that regard.
That's where the whole thing with Mike S. Miller came in, where it's like he was on Ben Shapiro show and everything, where he had a comic book on there that was like an American superhero, and he had this superhero punch a gangster, like a gangster who happened to not be white, and they said, okay, well, that's too far, so they took down his campaign.
That is the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my entire life. That is so dumb.
That's what happened.
Oh no. You can't punch a black man. That's just like, a bridge too far, You can punch Whitey all you want. But a black man, no, that's sacred ground. Like that melanin is it's holy, all right? You cannot touch the melanin.
Pretty much. They have political czars over there. So it's way more political. They approve of certain things. And they don't care if someone makes a fake campaign, as long as it's jabbing in the face of someone they hate. I think they made like a fake Cyberfog campaign or something like that happened with one of the confiscators. And the guy just kept sending a message after message. Hey, this is not my campaign. It's not real. Take it down. It did nothing. They had to go to like some sort of consumer authority to come in there and force it down. Because Kickstarter does not care. Stay away from Kickstarter. I'd just go with Indiegogo. And relatively speaking, they're way more honest and easy to work with. I don't care what your politics are.
Okay.
So far, they haven't.
What I would recommend, this is like doing a campaign is its own job. It's its own crazy, hectic. Oh, yeah. Like I've talked to people, because I used to interview people on Kickstarter for video games. And if you think comic books are hard, video games are crazy hard. So they had to, they told me when the game was published, the hardest thing out of all of the development of the game wasn't the game. It was the Kickstarter, because every day you are selling yourself. You are releasing content. Like it's not just, hey, I'm a Kickstarter, please help me. It's like every day you got to release stuff, tweet about it, share about it, do an interview, do another interview, show off some swag you can get. What's your bonus if you donate $100 or whatever? Like this constant marketing, and people don't know that. They don't realize that marketing is how you get these campaigns to run. And I've worked in marketing for a decade or so, and it's basic, like email marketing, just basic email. Like, how do you make an attractive email? How does the link work? And how do you get the squeeze page to attract people? How do you get their email from the email you sent them so they could sign up to something else? Like, there's all kinds of weird things you have to learn about. I don't think you have to go that crazy, but in order to get the campaign even going, you have to show off the artwork. You have to show off some content, and that'll be tough. So you have to find some artists that like your idea. And I don't think your idea is bad because it's popular. People are watching this stuff on TV, so there's obviously a demand for it. And all you're doing is going, look, here's my flavor. Here's my version. I think it's better. Here you go. And you could find, I'm sure you'll find at least 2 or 3 artists out there that love your idea and are willing to show off some artwork. I don't know if they're going to be dedicated.
Actually, I have a short list. I have a short list of artists that I've come to trust implicitly because I've worked with them. They delivered on time. They're really passionate. I have some artists. If you want to know some artists or be pointed in the direction of artists, I have a short list. I've gotten my a green silver approval or something. So I have those under my wing.
Okay.
Want some,
so
I can send you in that direction.
We got the basic business going. We got the basic marketing. We're going to set up a campaign. Now we're going to have to talk about the actual artwork because you said something about a manga style or a manga method. Is it going to be the Japanese style? Is it going to be Chinese, the South Korean style, like the long pages, webcomic style? What is your idea for how this is going to look?
Well, the style that I was kind of going for, I don't know the particular style. I would say mostly like a Japanese sort of like, seinen style. If you're familiar with like, seinen like One Punch Man and Record of Ragnarok.
Okay.
Like, that sort of like, I wouldn't say realistic, but, but very like, detailed and very, stylized, I'd say.
Okay, so definitely a more mature story, obviously, and you don't want chibi, you don't want super deformed, you don't want, I don't know, crazy, gigantic anime or manga eyes. You want...
Oh, no.
You want the style of... The action style, the perspective style, a very dynamic style of Japanese or manga style, but you want it to look like people. You want it to be actually Westernish or European, not the Japanese Eastern style that you might see. I guess you could call it, I was about to say manhwa, but that's very specific because it's very long form and it borrows from the manga style, but usually in those cases it's full color and it's big. It's long, big.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do that. So long as you get your style right, and then once you get that, then you have to say, okay, who's going to like this style? And then you have to see what else is out there, because the artist will be drawing in a certain style, and you got to ask them, where did you get your style? What kind of comics do you like that you learned? And then look at that demographic. I know it sounds weird, but you have to learn marketing. You have to learn who's going to buy your comic on style alone. And then, okay, how do I get this demographic, which I think I know is in the Netflix TV watching The Boys sort of demographic. How do I get that to pay attention to me? And then that's when you start doing advertising whenever you get your campaign going, after you've achieved your artist and he agrees with you and he or she does some practice pages and that sort of thing. You can't just go to a campaign with a few concept arts sketches. You have to go in there with some really strong looking stuff. Even a colorized
it's
page.
going to be... there's a lot of factors that I have to take into consideration here. It's going to be a nightmare to think about all the single factors that go into a successful comic, but hopefully I can make it work.
Okay. Okay, so what I want you to do is definitely talk to LitDev after this and have him share some information on possible artists. LitDev, do you know where you go to find these guys? It was all just word of mouth, or what did you do?
I got them through Twitter. Everyone I contact through Twitter so far.
Okay.
I even found my main artists through Twitter.
Okay, great. I mean, whatever the method is, just you got to get out there. You got to get some people because honestly, even in game dev, it's the artists that start the motivation for everyone else on the team. For the concept sketches to be so good that it motivates the programmers and the creative people, the game designers, everyone to go, oh wow, that's what it's going to look like. Okay, I'm going to think of a system around that. I'm going to think of a level around that, and whatever comes up from that. So that is very important to find the right artist because they might want to get paid up front just to do sketches. It's like, oh, okay, is that the kind of relationship you want? I don't know. But just tell them the numbers. Be honest with them. what you could pay them if the Kickstarter is successful. So
yeah, like the big issue for me is like I hate Twitter and I refuse to use Twitter. Mostly all of the artists that I've usually found through Discord and Reddit, and like even though I clown on Reddit a lot, like I fucking hate Reddit, but there's a lot of aspiring creators on Reddit, like who basically just want to get their shit out there like as much as I do. So it's a good place to find people, I'd say, like a lot better than Twitter.
All right. Okay. So next to me is the main part, which is the storytelling, and how you write is up to you. But it's not just writing; it's planning out the layout of a page. And I would imagine that's what you should be doing because you're also the author, and you'll be there's the Neil Gaiman method, which is basically writing a movie script, where he's just writing in that script format. And like first panel is this big, second panel is this, third panel is that, and there's dialogue bubble or there's narration text or blocks or whatever you want to call that. So that's
I kind of went with the Alan Moore method.
Oh yeah,
where he just has a limit of 9 panels per page. Like a limit. You don't have to do 9 panels per page, but like a limit of them.
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to get the idea of that page across in like 9 panels or less, and it helps you with the workflow. The panel 1, the introduction of that page's concept, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. By the time you get to the 9th one, basically each page kind of like a paragraph or a section of a story. So each page you could take each page by itself, and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end on its own. And then you kind of end on something that'll intrigue the audience, so they can turn the page. Like each and every page should have one of those. Like a deal with something at the end.
Yeah. I actually wanted to utilize like the Marvel method when like you're creating my story. Like, are you guys familiar with the Marvel method?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like
that
I don't
means
know. Like
you have to find an amazing artist who really wants to.
Actually, just write up the script. It's like, okay, here's page 1. Here's what happens. There you go, and then we'll add in the dialogue later.
Yeah.
Well,
essentially, yeah.
That's an interesting idea. I've never seen anyone do that. Modernly, rather, I've never seen current people or people in the industry do that. But I would really get to know your artist if that case. Say, hey, how are we gonna do this? And well, I think the Marvel method works. They'll be like, what's that? You have to explain to them. They might not be on board because a lot of artists, they want every detail spelled out to them before they do anything. Because if you just give them general ideas, they're going to fill in the blanks with their own ideas, and then you're going to change your story as a result. So what if you're going to do that, you still have to plan out your entire story, like chapter 1 and chapter 2. Okay, all right. As long as you're aware of whatever technique you're using to plan out your first year and your second year. So, all right. I don't know what else we could help out with in terms of setup, because this is all you. This is all your heart and your blood, sweat, and tears to bring this baby to life. And if you don't have that motivation, because it will take lots of sleepless nights and nagging people and fighting with your artist, and who knows what else is going to happen with your publisher, and you have to be aware of that. So, 2 years of your life.
Yeah.
You're going to
I think we can. I'm sorry. You can go on.
I was going to say, this is what you have to say to yourself. I'm not going to motivate you. It's your own thing. I can't help you be a better creator. I can just help you be more efficient and help you with marketing. Of course, I could talk about it. I could bring you on ever so often to talk about the campaign whenever it's up and running. Publish on Twitter and email if I have a list going. I used to have one, but that is, I think I can help out with the basics and networking pretty much. But everything else is purely you, and I'd love to see that happen. So if you're up for it,
all right, great,
and you know how much money you need to pay artists, but it's finding the right talent that's the hardest part, and it's not just comic books. I think it's any business, finding the right talent, because you can't do everything yourself. And it's tough.
All right. So I think we can actually move on to actually talking about the Bronx Boys, because we've talked a lot about marketing and stuff like that. So I think we actually about like the actual like the characters and like the story and like the villains and like the powers and stuff like that.
Sure, go ahead.
I think we can. I'm on that. Okay, so like I said, like the Bronx Boys is a sort of street level, on the ground, like story after Parasite Warchief. It follows a team of heroes known as the Bronx Boys, who basically patrol the Bronx. So we have the team leader, Mr. Heat. He is a bald, charismatic black man who has the ability to generate massive amounts of heat through his skin. Like I mentioned this like in like the live stream like a few days ago, and you were like, oh well, wait a minute, like can't humans like just like do that naturally? Yes, they can, but Mr. Heat just generates like heat strong enough to like melt steel bars and stuff like that. He's a very hot boy, I'd like to say. And I actually like this really cool idea where, like, Mr. Heat fights with, like, a pair of brass knuckles, and he heats up his arm to be hot enough to where, like, the brass knuckles turn, like, orange, but not hot enough, like, melt them, where he's just, like, duking out with brass knuckles that are, like, super heated. I think that's a really cool visual. Right there. So a little bit of...
You might want to consider tungsten as opposed to brass. Brass has a lower melting point than tungsten. Tungsten lights up like crazy, and that would be super dangerous because tungsten is the filament we use, very, very thin filament we use for light bulbs. So bright, so hot that a little bit of electricity will pass through it and generate light. So if you can imagine heavy tungsten knuckles or whatever you want to call them,
that'd be awesome.
That would be like, whoa. These
or you could do this
light. Yeah.
Or you could do the Star Trek method and say it's Martian brass.
Oh yeah. It's Ractigino.
I mean,
just good coffee.
It's not ale, it's Romulan ale. Then you can make it whatever you want. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I mean, funny enough, like in the world of like I guess the Parasite Warchief universe, like I need a better title for like this, like, reality. But like we do have like several alien like races. We have like the Atlanteans. We have like the Metamen, who I will like to talk about some more. I want to get to talking about Pretty Boy. And then we have the Martians. So I could just have like it be like, hey, this is like Atlantean metal, or this is like Metamen metal, or this is like a Martian metal, or something like that.
What I would recommend from a conceptual idea is figure out your voice of when you talk about fantastical elements. And I've seen this even with manga, with isekai genre, where they talk about item drops or mechanics in the game world, that the author is very detailed because people like details. People like this aspect of the video game world that they can relate to, because they all, RPG mechanics, I know those. It's like +2 to elf slaying or something. Like, oh, great. So then your brain goes, oh, he's going to use this to slay some elves in the future just because you mentioned some random stat about the world. And once you understand that voice of what your audience likes, you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about how Heatman interacts with metals because he's so concerned about melting things because he's so hot. And he's like, oh shit, I'm around some aluminum. I gotta back away. I gotta avoid all the steel beams or steel girders of this building that's going up, or else it'll start collapsing in 10 years or something. Like this level of detail that your audience goes, oh, he knows his chemistry, he knows his physics or his civil engineering or whatever you're dealing with. Like that's really important for your audience. I just remember that.
Yeah, so a little bit more about Mr. Heat. So Mr. Heat, before he became Mr. Heat, I haven't thought of like a proper name for him yet. I'm thinking of maybe like calling him Liam or something like that. So basically, Liam was one of the lucky humans spared during Carl McKenna's eugenics programs. Basically being a superhuman and having fantastical abilities. Carl deemed him good enough to basically survive survive the calling, essentially. And humans who basically survived the calling, they basically lived in relative peace. Like they were allowed to live their lives as they saw fit, so long as they didn't rise up and try oppose Carl McKenna's global regime. So basically, after Carl McKenna was defeated and some sense of normalcy was returned to the world, Mr. Heat found out what happened to a lot of his friends who didn't survive the purges. And so Mr. Heat feels a huge sense of survivor's guilt because of this. He feels he continually asks himself every single night, why did all these good people die but I didn't? Aside from my abilities, I'm not special. I'm not I'm not the smartest, I'm not the most charismatic, I'm not the strongest. Why did I survive when so many of my friends died? And that kind of prompts Mr. Heat to become a superhero because he feels a need to atone for the sin, or the self-perceived sin of basically being one of the lucky ones, essentially.
Okay,
so that's kind of what I was going for, Mr. Heat.
So that was the main character, the leader of the Bronx Boys.
Yep, he is. Yep, he's the team leader and sort of our POV, a character.
Okay. What other characters have you thought up that will provide proper conflict between the heroes and the villains? Who are the guys that are challenging these good guys?
Okay, so you want me to talk more about the team, or do you want me to talk more about the villains? Because I do have a decent selection of of villains to choose from.
One thing I have
to be fair,
some writers tend to do, especially in independent comics, they do want to do ensemble casts. That even happens in what do they call the professional comics, in DC and Marvel these days. But unfortunately, the writers they have don't have the skill or the or the drive or basically any form of talent, so they can't really balance it out. Because when you have an ensemble cast, you have to balance it out, especially if the other members are important. So what I would suggest, if you want to have an ensemble cast and you just this first book and everything, then choose a character that you want to focus on. I call him a focus character. So everything you follow that guy, and then you kind of experience the story through the eyes of that guy, and you kind of this guy meets this other character, and this is how they interact. And this guy meets this other characters, how they interact, and basically, the Luke Skywalker sort of scenario where they get explained things, and as they interact with these other people, the audience is able to learn things. And I've seen somebody happen so many times where they get excited about having this large group of people as team, but they don't have a focus character, and it's kind of muddled. It's just getting a shotgun to the face of information, as opposed to just spoon feeding it to you a little bit by little bit. And when that happens, when you don't spoon feed a little bit, it's like having too much food in your mouth. It is really hard to take, and it's really hard to swallow, and you might choke. So
I plan on basically introducing the members of the Bronx Boys one at a time, where basically I'll have a few arcs dedicated to Mr. Heat and Mr. Heat alone, and then he'll be slowly introduced the other members who'll basically form the Bronx Boys. That's kind of the plan that I was going for.
I'm thinking of, I brought this up a year ago or so, a comic called The Authority, which is like a version of the Justice League, just more adult, more violent, and the comic book is more like that as well. So you have the evil Batman like a character, and he kills people. You have the Superman character who doesn't really kill people, but he's still pretty much Superman, all his abilities and powers. And what I recommend is reading those comics just to see how they do it, and then going, oh, okay, I know how this works. I know how that works. And you get a feel for what you might want to tell your story and how. Because if they worked, there's no reason why yours can't. And all you gotta do is see how they did it, and then do it a bit better or a bit different.
Yeah. So you want to talk more about like the team or like a move on to like the villains?
I think the major conflict is more important to me. So go ahead and talk about the villains.
Okay, so like I have like a bunch of like villains planned, but like the major one that I have planned, but I haven't like given much thought to, is a secret society of swordsmen called the Knights of Excelsior. They're basically a group of like 5 extremely powerful, extremely influential swordsmen who basically rule New York through a connection of shadow syndicates, mob organizations and villain syndicates. My big problem with the Knights of Excelsior is I don't know, I haven't thought much about their motivation yet. Just why are they doing what they're doing? What's their modus operandi? Why exactly are they swordsmen? I haven't given much thought to that, but I basically had this idea for a secret society type of deal, kind of like the Court of Owls in the Batman comics, the Court of Owls, or something, or something similar to the Illuminati from Marvel, just a super secret society of incredibly influential, incredibly powerful people who basically run New York through fear, intimidation, and a bunch of other methods of basically maintaining their shadow control over the city.
All right. If they all wield swords, that's a perfect idea of, can these swords stand up to Heat Man? Can they withstand being melted? If so, not the greatest group. If not, great. Talk about that. Talk about why the swords are so powerful or dense or resilient to heat or whatever you want to call it. So that's the kind of stuff you want. You want a team of people that will provide an obvious conflict physically, if we're talking about superheroes, so that it's oh, Heat Man goes up against Iceman. How does that work? Oh, obviously Iceman can counteract Heat Man's abilities. That's the basic level stuff. But you could play around with those ideas a lot more when you fleshed out your characters more. So that's fine. That's great.
I've given a lot of thought to the main cast. I just haven't thought a whole lot about the villains. I have ideas for, because I kind of want to do this by arc by arc, where basically every arc I'll basically introduce another villain. So maybe a little bit monster of the week, but I want to give these guys the depth they deserve.
Okay. All right. So that's the second part of your comic book, the second year, where all these characters introduced and they're competing for something.
Yeah.
And that's very important to figure out what that something is before you get writing. And plan out the ending of both runs so that you know where you're going. And you can fill in the blanks.
If the audience has any ideas for the Knights of Excelsior, I would very much like to hear them.
So long as we're talking about the conflict between the good and the bad guys being not just physical, but ideological, what is the actual thing that these individuals want? Because they're not all one person. They're not a monolith. They are individuals, and they have their own aspirations.
Yeah.
So I'm sure some of these guys do not completely see eye to eye with the main leader of the villains or whatever. So that's where things get interesting for me, because the villains are to me more interesting in comic books, at least, because that's where the conflict lies. So
yeah. I was planning on having internal divisions between like the knights, because like the knights are basically a bunch of like old men and women. There's like five of them, and they basically have like their own like styles of basically like swordsmanship, governance. I did actually have this idea where like one of the knights, a woman named Maria, she kind of has like her own agenda going on. It ties into another villain that I had named Barric. And Barric is, well, like he was like an apprentice knight to Maria, but he basically left after he basically was tired of feeling like a lapdog for the knights. Like he wanted to make like his own name as like the world's greatest swordsman. So he basically left the organization to basically like to basically try out his new sword skills on like on superhuman beings. And Maria wants Barric back because Barric has like this unique ability to him, where basically Barric's superhuman ability is like he can basically adapt to pretty much anything. Like I had like this scene in mind where Barric, like, because like Barric's also like a major villain throughout the story, where Barric gets shot in the head by a bounty hunter hired by the knights. And Barric is brought back to Maria, and Barric's like, okay, like, how did I survive that? Why am I alive? And Maria explains to him that, like, the reason why they let him be an apprentice was because they were trying to, like, nurture his, like, adaptation ability. And they were trying to, like, groom him into basically being, like, like, the ultimate knight of Excelsior, just, like, someone who could basically take on the skills of all 5 of the knights and basically like rule New York as like the greatest swordsman like in the world. Not even the greatest swordsman in the world, but like the strongest creature in the world, because like as Maria explains to Barric, Barric will eventually undergo like a transformation where Barric will become like the strongest being on planet Earth, like if his adaptation ability keeps on going at the rate that he's going. Because the thing about Barric is Barric gets stronger after like every fight he participates in. So at the beginning of the series, he's a formidable threat, but he's definitely like a manageable one. And I imagine like at the end of the series, he's just like a god level like antagonist, where just like he's putting our main heroes through the ringer. And Maria wants to like nurture that and basically sort of like transform Barric into basically being like the Knight of Excelsior.
Knights of Excelsior actually sounds like a really good title for a series. The Knights of Excelsior.
Well, it reminded me a bit of John Wick's The Continental, where John Wick is, okay, he's this one guy who does a certain mission, but there's this whole world surrounding that, this world of assassins and an underbelly of New York that is, well, they're making a series after it, right? It's so popular. And that's
called The Continental.
The Continental.
I don't have very big hopes for it, though. It's a series in this day and age.
This day and age is the problem, yes, but the concept is so slick and well put together because of the production value of John Wick. It's like, hey, you know what? I'd watch the first episode of that just to see what it's like. And if you could think of an idea of a secret society, which I think is what you're doing, that operates properly, and how does that operate? What do they do? How do they get by? What's their focus? What's their currency? What do they do to keep hidden? Like all these things that you want to look at to create a society, because there's been secret societies and stories for hundreds of years, and from Edgar Allan Poe, we've got from Sherlock Holmes and all these other murder mysteries where the secret society has always been a problem because it's kind of contrived. So don't make it contrived. Do something that is going to make it believable and realistic.
Yeah.
And that's where you want a mundane world where all these amazing people, like with swords, which in New York is probably not the most practical weapon to have.
Yeah.
So you got to explain to them, well, why do they use swords compared to a guy with an Uzi? Yeah, why does a guy with an Uzi just hose everyone down? So why are the swords so special? What's so big about it? So there has to be something about that. And if it's not like, oh, they can't deflect bullets or they can't use swords practically, there has to be something else about them as a person or as a character, that they are smart enough, they are rich enough, they have resources enough to avoid scenarios like that. So they are they are very, very good at what they do as controllers in the background. And again, I go to Vampire the Masquerade, where you have this whole cabal of vampires that have been around for thousands of years, and they manipulate the city because they know how important it is to keep hidden. And every vampire knows that. If they break that masquerade, they die. The people around the scenario die. So the information never gets leaked out. And that is the premise of that whole series, the White Wolf Kindred series and all the other books. It's a very tight, like, how do you keep things secret? How does no one know about the Knights of Excelsior? Like, how does that happen? So there has to be some kind of, I don't know, Hillary Clinton's kill list. I don't know, like something, like, why does this keep happening? like why does people keep dying? It doesn't make any sense. Like, that's shit like that you have to like play with.
Yeah.
And make it more believable.
Yeah, and for those in the audience, Excelsior is definitely a reference to Stan Lee. Like, I wanted to pay homage to, like, one of, like, the comic greats.
Stan Lee, who actually did not approve of putting your political agenda in comics, despite what they might say.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Stan Lee.
He literally said, like, he doesn't like being preached to, so he doesn't like to preach to other people. That's a literal quote from Stan Lee. I have it in one of my videos, in fact, with him saying those things. So, yeah, Stan Lee's good. Stan Lee's awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, so the Knights of Excelsior, like a super secret, like, super powerful society of swordsmen. They basically run New York through a series of, like, mobster gangs, supervillain teams. Basically trying to think of a motivation for them. I'll think of something later, maybe. Like, I'll definitely iron out these concepts as, like, go on. But when I get back to, like, like the team. So, like, so next member that I want to talk about is Master Scanner. And Master Scanner, he's a martial arts genius with the ability to scan a person mentally and be able to, like, figure out, like, what's their next move. Smud Boy, I know you're a fan of Record of Ragnarok, so, like, his ability is very similar to Sasaki Kojiro's from that series, where he's able to, like, look at a person, look at their stance, look at, like, how they act, how they, like, walk, how they talk, and basically be able to, like, create a mental image of them, and be able to, like, predict, like, what they do before they even do it. And his story is basically he was before the Carl purges happened. Master Scanner was a failed rapper who basically tried to, like, get into the industry and basically got shit canned. I imagine him kind of looking like Eminem because, like, he is, because he's kind of like like a white boy rapper who's basically, like, who tried to make it in the industry, didn't get in. And then what happened was, during the Carl purges, as I'm calling them now, what happened was, to basically be able to survive, in, like, this, like, new world, Master Scanner basically honed his body to basically be a living weapon. He basically learned, like, whatever martial art he could, like, under the sun. And he essentially transformed himself from being, like, a failed rapper into basically, like, one of, like, the greatest martial artists on planet Earth. And Carl's whole motivation is, like, he just wants a good fight because, like, his scanner ability makes it so, like, he knows an opponent, like, before they even make a move. And he's very frustrated by that. Just, like, he's like, I just want a good fight, and my own, like, abilities basically like, make a good fight impossible to have. So I just want someone who can, like, truly challenge me. And that's kind of like, Master Scanner's whole thing is he just wants a good fight.
Wait, like Goku?
Yeah, kinda. Like he just wants like a good fight. He just wants like a good fight.
Nico Vianzi. Does he get blonde hair? And is how
I mean, he already has like blonde hair because, like, in my head, he looks like Eminem. Looks like.
That's a pretty, I can visualize that. Yeah, it's actually a good idea when doing a comic book is to like get in a celebrity or something like that, and then use as a basis for your character. For Dr. Alpha, I have Brad Pitt. He was the Brad Pitt from Fight Club is kind of the basis for Dr. Alpha, at least originally. And then John Hurt is actually the basis for Mulvey on the Martian Mastermind, and the bad guy in Dr. Alpha.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was.
So
always
like,
reminded
not a
of,
whole lot to say about Master Scanner, except like he's like like the team's. Like, like he's basically like the martial arts instructor of the team. Like he's basically Mr. Heat's second in command. Where if Mr. Heat goes down, like Master Scanner becomes like the leader, because he basically like teaches like everyone else on the team like how to basically like do well in like hand to hand scenario.
Okay. Sounds cool. I mean, these are all interesting ideas and very superhuman or superhero-ish. So lots to play with, especially if you're talking about people fighting and their main opponents are a bunch of dudes with swords. So long as you can create scenarios for those dudes to fight the guys with swords in a believable way, you'll be fine.
Yeah. So the next character I want to talk about is a Roach, and Roach is he's not a Roach is very interesting because like Roach is what I like to refer to as like a were insect. It's kind of like a werewolf, but instead he basically becomes like an insect at night. So Roach's backstory was he was just a normal person living out his life, and then during the Carl purges, what happened was the man who had become Roach was basically sent to one of the concentration camps that Carl had set up, and they basically performed like ruthless experiments to basically try and develop superhuman potential within regular human beings. And Roach's potential was he became like a giant cockroach monster, similar to have you guys seen Men in Black?
Oh yeah, all the real ones.
Yeah.
I've seen all the real ones.
Yeah, I imagine him being like Edgar the Bug from Men in Black 1, where at night he just tears off his own skin and becomes this giant cockroach grasshopper monster. And is just terrifying to look at. But Roach's conflict is essentially he's just a normal person who just wants a normal life. But every night he transforms into this freakish cockroach monster that basically just wants eat and kill everything it sees. And it's basically forced Roach to basically live out his life in the sewer, essentially, where basically he has no friends, he has no hobbies, he has no social life. He basically just lives in the sewer, miserable every single day, and then basically at night he becomes this giant cockroach monster, basically scavenges around for food. It's so kind of a Hulk. A Hulk versus Bruce Banner kind of a scenario where the man himself is very mild mannered and very passive, but the monster is very aggressive and very in your face, I'd say, and also terrifying because it's a giant fucking cockroach. It's scary. It's a scary creature.
Kind of reminded me of the Nosferatu in Vampire the Masquerade, that they all live in the sewers. They have to, and very rarely they'll pop up in the surface, but they're experts at sneaking around, so they never get caught.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. I'm actually a fan of like Vampire the Masquerade, I got the reference, but like I didn't really. I was like subconsciously thinking it. I believe. I don't know.
Well, it's a community of vampires, so it's not just they have claws and they can hunch back and climb the walls. They also have vampire seduction skills, so they can trick people into forgetting things and charm people, and be very careful of how that works, because they can't go around killing, because that's one of the rules, is you can't go around killing, or else they'll drive attention. There'll be manhunts. They'll be figuring out who the hell these monsters are that start sucking blood in the middle of the night. It would be too much. So you have to be very careful how that all works.
Yeah. Okay. So the
who else do you have next? Say? Yeah, who else do you have next?
Okay, so the next character is a Pretty Boy. And Pretty Boy and the next character, I'm going to talk about Harbor Girl, are part of the two like alien races that I mentioned. So Pretty Boy is a metaman. And metamen, okay, so like this is going to require like a bit of explanation. But metamen are basically these conceptual beings, like who basically embody like a certain like aspect. Like for example, in Parasite Warchief, we meet a metaman known as Conquest, and she is the embodiment of like conquest. And her whole thing is like she exists like to conquer. So Pretty Boy's whole thing is he's actually a metaman known as Vanity. And his whole thing is like he's incredibly vain, he's incredibly self-centered, he's incredibly arrogant and just like full of himself. And the thing about metamen is like metamen can't exist unless they like fulfill like their conceptual purpose, or else they basically wither and die. So for example, like after the events in Parasite Warchief, Vanity was basically left alone on planet Earth, stranded from his people, stranded from stranded from like the Metamen home dimension. And he basically was beginning to wither and die because he didn't like fulfill like his conceptual purpose of basically being like loved and adored as the concept of vanity. So basically he became a superhero in order to basically like, in order to basically fulfill his purpose and to basically like, keep himself from dying, because like because like he is the literal concept of vanity. He is basically just the literal concept of, I mean, I don't really know like how else to say it. Like he's just like he's just vanity incarnate.
All right. Okay.
So yeah. So any questions regarding that? Any questions?
So these guys all have their own physicality, or is he like a guy who's not much of a fighter, because he seems to be a charmer?
Is he like Narcissus from Greek mythology?
Yeah, kinda. I kind of like hearken them to like the new gods from a DC Comics. Do you guys know what the new gods are?
It's a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So like, so for those who don't know what the new gods are, the new gods from DC Comics are basically characters like Darkseid or Orion or the High Father, who basically embody like a certain aspect. Darkseid is the aspect of evil, essentially. So think about it like that, where like where they have like a physicality to them, and they basically embody. This. I'm sorry if I'm like explaining this horribly. Like like this is kind of like some high concept shit. I'm delving into some high concept.
That's all right.
But yeah, it's like essentially essentially the Metamen are this race of beings who just like embody a singular concept, and if they don't like fulfill their concept, they basically like starve to death, and they wither and die. And they look just like you or me. Like they basically just look like regular humans, but they're like stronger, faster, like more durable. Because they are literal concepts. Like how exactly can you kill a concept? So I imagine that Pretty Boy is very hard to kill.
Okay, so he is just very strong and smart and this and that, but he's not like a dedicated combatant. He's a fellow who's just overall a good example of what it means to be alive, I guess. He can do all these things.
Yeah. So the next character, like the final member of the boys, isn't even a boy. It's a girl. It's the only female member of the Bronx Boys. She is a Atlantean named Harbor Girl. And just like a quick recap of her abilities, she has super strength, heightened reflexes underwater. She can breathe underwater. And it's ties with some of the events that happened in Parasite Warchief. So, and during the final act of Parasite Warchief, the Atlanteans invade the East Coast. And Harbor Girl was one of the Atlanteans sent to basically conquer the surface world. But unlike the other Atlanteans, she didn't really hate humanity. Like she basically saw them as a curiosity to basically be explored. And actually basically ventured and journeyed on planet Earth. She basically began to love and appreciate the planet and her people. So when the Atlanteans left the surface and went back to Atlantis, Harbor Gal basically stayed behind, and she basically acts as a guardian angel to to basically any sailors in the harbor. I imagine her being a very naive, very bubbly and very wide-eyed character. Like I had this scene in mind where the Bronx Boys go to a restaurant, and basically Mr. Heat buys Harbor Gal a burger, and she's like, "Hey, what is this?" And Mr. Heat just try it. So Harbor Gal has her first burger, and she just overcome with emotion, being like, "This is so delicious! I love this!" And she just starts ravenously just consuming the burger and the fries and the shake, and just and just being an overall goofball about it. So I imagine her being the most innocent character within the Bronx Boys. She's bubbly, naive, just an overall good person, I'd say.
All right, cool. I mean, that's a pretty big group of people there. That would be at least one comic book or 25, 30 pages each on one of their stories. So you would have to play a lot of very strict writing or passages to tighten up all these characters and connect them to the antagonists and have the underlying plot of the antagonist be revealed and what they're trying to do, and it's
I would say focus it down, small, decrease the scope of the at least the very first article, very first whatever it is, the comic book, first story. Focus on maybe one character, one bad guy, make it simple. Keep it as simple as possible, essentially.
Okay.
It depends. It really depends on how they're going to introduce characters. Like you could have the first two, like Master Scanner and Mr. Heat, team up and get things done and come into conflict and what they're trying to do. Mr. Heat has his problems with being the only one left alive, and Master Scanner has his own desires to fight, and that could work well as a dynamic between characters. and then you have the actual conflict with the fighting and the action between whomever. And there has to be elements of that for intrigue and what the hook is. Like, why do we want to learn about these guys? What's so great about them, and why do we want to read more? That is what I want to see, and you should be developing that every day. You're just like, okay, he's going to look like this, he's going to have this. Some people are talking about sentient swords in the chat. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe you have all these blades that can withstand extreme heat. So that maybe there's a whole society of inanimate objects that are telling these other people how to behave. I don't know. All kinds of great ideas. So you could have fun with whatever your villains are up to. We still don't know. But lots of great ideas you could play with and lots of characters. So you have more than enough ideas to work with. So
yeah. Funny enough, you mentioned Master Scanner and Mr. Heat teaming up. I actually based these two characters off of Luke Cage and Iron Fist from Marvel Comics. So that's kind of like a nice little parallel right there, because in the comics, a Luke Cage and Iron Fist usually team up together, and they're pretty good friends, I'd say.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Is there anything else you want to talk about? That seems like a pretty good rundown of your idea. And all you got to do is keep going. Keep fleshing it out. Get an artist going. Get some artwork going. Make sure you're confident. Look at other Kickstarters by other comic book artists and see how they ran and why. Talk to them. Say, hey, what did you do? How did you get this thing working? And at that point, it's all about connections. So... whew, a lot of work ahead of you, sir. So
yeah, I would say that this is a pretty good stopping point. I'd say, I basically said everything I need to say. I basically laid out the main cast and then the main villains. So everything else would basically just be superfluous, I'd say.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. We're gonna keep helping you out whenever you bug us for attention or whatever you need. But please do keep us updated. Try and get some social media going, even though you don't like it, just because it's a communication tool. And the artists are there, the people are there, and see how you can charm these people over to your idea, because it's all about relationships. When you're talking about,
and thanks for having me on, Smud. I really appreciate this.
I like
opportunity to talk about.
Yeah, I like
comic.
I like people who have practical ideas, and all you got to do is just keep pushing it.
Yeah.
And dedicate a lot of even with Dunn, who's an author, he dedicates at least an hour a day to his writing, at least an hour every day, and he's been publishing books every few months this year. So that's just publishing, self-publishing on Amazon, which is a lot different than making a comic book. So I want you to keep reading, check out The Authority, check out other comics, see how they tell stories, see the art style. Obviously, it's going to be different from the person you get, but just to give you a visual idea when you plan stuff out. Even though you want to do the Marvel method, you still should have your own idea of how things should look and be laid out. So just keep doing that, keep writing, keep communicating to artists, post on forums, whatever you need to do. Talk to these people and get some artwork going. That is key for making a comic book. You want to show off your artwork. You want to motivate yourself. You want the artist to be motivated by, hey, I can draw. Of course you can. Let's see what you can do. And that will help.
To quote John Malin, when he used to critique campaigns and everything, what you want is 5 bomb-ass pages. And basically that's all you need.
Yeah, get some really great artwork going that you can say, there's Heat Man. That is the perfect look. And then there's the villain, and then there's the other. Here's an action panel. Here, give me that juicy looking cool thing. Combined with if you tell me it's basically John Wick's The Continental, but with swords, I'll be like, ooh, interesting. That's cool. You have to have that sort of pitch sentence for everything. It's like Superman, but he's existential. I don't know. He's something. Like whatever Heatman is his main problem is, like, do that. Summarize everything very quickly and neatly.
Yeah. There's actually something that I did want to like discuss with you guys, like before I head off. So I did mention that Mr. Heat is a black man. And I've actually been like, I don't know if I've been like, psyching myself up to this, but like, but when creating characters that, when creating characters, I'm creating like, minority characters, like it always feels like, you have to like, with like the current like, political like, climate today, it always feels like you have to like, walk a very tight, like, tight, like a very like long, tightrope, essentially, where it just feels like, you can't write characters who are like of a different minority than you, unless you like insert a bunch of like BS themes about like oh, their racial oppression and mystery has to deal with like being like accosted by the police or some bullshit like that.
Well, there's nothing wrong with having practical examples of society, and you can make fun of that, or what would Heatman do in this scenario where he gets accosted and the cuffs just melt off him or whatever, like silly stuff like that. Like you can do fun things if you really wanted to. So
yeah.
I see nothing wrong with having fun, interesting introductions, conflicts, dialogues. That what would Heatman do in this scenario, and that's how you write. It's like just put the character in a scenario and just I know this guy, I wrote him. What would he do? Well, he's a kind of a depressed guy. He might go along with the police to a point. Like, who knows?
Yeah, because my main motivation for having like Heatman be a black man was just like hey, I just wanted to have like a cool black superhero. Like I just want because like I like characters like Black Panther. I like characters like Luke Cage, and and I want to just have like my own like black superhero who's also like the main character. The only issue is basically just like I don't want to like I'm just like kind of like waiting for like the Twitter hate mob to basically be like, oh, you wrote a black character but you didn't have this and this, you're a racist or something like that.
I wouldn't even worry about that.
Complete BS.
Yeah, I would not even worry about that. That's not even something you should be listening to. You should be thinking all about what your customer, what your demographic wants. What do they want from a superhero comic? How would that work? People want to read superhero comics. They do. They just don't have access to them, or good ones, rather.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind.
I would say also remember to put the optimism in there somewhere, because even the Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, it's like some of the darkest. You ever see Batman and Gotham? There's like rapists and child murderers, and Superman is like a simp for the government, all that stuff. But even then, it ends on a positive, optimistic note at the very end.
Yeah, like I did have like this like idea in my head where like like the world of the Bronx Boys like is a very like depressing and very like a gloomy world, but at the same time there are like like shivers, well like there are like splinters of light like coming in through like the cracks, where like where characters like Harbor Gal are just very like are kind of like that levity where like where you have like this like misery going like around you, but then you have like a character like Harbor Gal who's just like who will basically be like fascinated by like an ant on the street, or basically like or basically eating a burger for the first time, just like a very lighthearted, very like bubbly character. Like it kind of just adds like that like levity to like this very dark world.
Sounds good. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. We're gonna keep nagging you over the weeks to make sure you're doing okay and your progress has been going, because I mean you're serious about this, so we want to make sure you're on track. And if LitDev can give any context to you, that'd be great. And you figure out your relationship with your artists, and that is just to start. That's how you go about getting set up, so we can see some artwork, because that's the whole point of a comic book, is to see some artwork, at least to me. So I would recommend writing things out and not leave, because what you're doing is you're thrusting the art of creation to your artist where they might not want to do that. So that might be a huge problem for you. But it's up to you. However you want to write and create, you'll figure it out as you go. So thanks a lot. We really appreciate your time. Ideas sound cool. Thank you, Crumb. Thank you, LitDev. We'll talk to everyone soon. I think I'm either going to be on Shiny Stream soon, or I might do a Smudcast later today. I don't know yet. So we'll talk very shortly. Thanks, everyone. Have yourself a great day.